to contribute to a more sustainable planet. That is our goal, to do more with much less. A more sustainable agriculture through the efficient use of resources. Our effort is based on efficient use of water. We promote the development of technified agriculture, seeking to deliver in each drop of water everything necessary to achieve higher yields and superior quality. We provide products based on potassium nitrate that help reduce salinity accumulation, eliminating the need for additional irrigation to remove salts from the soil. Solutions of natural origin. Potassium nitrate is produced with the smallest carbon footprint in the industry. International expertise. We are agronomists at heart and have a network of experts around the world. We are driven to make this red the sweetest you have ever produced. This orange, of incomparable flavor. And this green, the most natural you have ever grown. We are committed to this challenge to contribute to a sustainable agriculture.
Good afternoon to fellow South Africans, and good morning and good day to listeners from around the world. My name is Duncan Napier and I work for SQM Africa and the office in South Africa. On behalf of SQM and on behalf of Kind Fertilizer, one of our distribution partners in South Africa, I would really like to welcome you all and thank you all for joining into this webinar. Today's webinar is titled Pecan Nut Production Overview in South Africa, with special reference to pecan tree nutritional concepts. We have 3 presentations lined up pertinent to this topic. Before I introduce the speakers, I would like to thank the SQM marketing team in Chile for their hard work in making this webinar possible. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Guillermo, and your team. And for all of you, if you have any questions during the presentations, please ask them by writing in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If time permits, these questions will be answered today, and if not today, then each question will be addressed at a later stage. Our first speaker today is Mr. Alphonse Visser. Alphonse is a farmer, he's an entrepreneur, and he's a businessman. Alphonse grew up in Hartswater and completed university and postgraduate studies in agriculture at the Orange Free State University in Bethlehem and the Northwest University in Potchefstroom. Alphonse is also a very accomplished farmer. He was selected as Farmer of the Year in 2008 by the biggest South African farming magazine, the Landbou Weekblad. Alphonse started SA Pecan in 2005 as a nut exporter. SA Pecan is the largest pecan exporter in South Africa for the last 8 years. Other companies owned by Alphonse are SA Peanuts, SA Alfalfa, and the Farlarts and Loskop cotton ginneries. These businesses are doing between 20 and 40% of the country's produce in these crops. For the last 4 years, Alphonse was presenter on behalf of the South African pecan industry at the China Tree Nut Conference. Welcome, Alphonse.
Thank you very much, Duncan, and thank for the opportunity to share information about the pecans with everybody on the webinar. The information we're going to share with you guys is going to be about pecan production in South Africa, the past season that we have, and then I'm going to show the impact of South Africa pecan production around the globe compared to USA and Mexico and Argentina, and the plantage in South Africa, what was the plantage in the past and how is the production forecast going to be set out, and also the sales prices that we have the past few seasons. On the slide there, you can see clearly where South Africa is situated, and the past season our crop was 80,200 ton that we have exported. The previous season, our crop was 21,700 ton. Out of that crop, you will see in later slides the percentage that we export. Our major export is to China. On the slide, you can also see the comparison of USA, Mexico, Peru, and Argentina, and Australia, which is the main other production areas for pecans. In China of pecans, the tonnage is not so easily to get that information, but it seems it will be about 2,000 tons, the production in China. On the second slide, you can see clearly the tonnage history of South Africa. We've come out of the past season from 18,000 up to 80,200 ton. My prediction is for the coming season, and that's in line with SAPA's prediction, is about 24,000 tons. If you do a comparison to the USA production, the current season of them that they're still in harvest, the estimate is about 115,000 tons. And Mexico, the production of the season they have already been done harvest almost, is about 100,000 tons. So there you can see South Africa production currently is about 10% of USA and Mexico production, if you take it in a ratio. If you go to the next production slide, there you see that the comparison about export tonnage of South Africa and US and Mexico to China. In 2018, you can clearly see the effect that the duty war between China and USA, the impact of that, about the lower amount of export to USA to China, and there was a little bit increase in South Africa export that season 2018. Then in 2021, you can clearly also see the huge effect that COVID had. It did have a lesser effect in South Africa. The reason for that was our crop is being exported from June up to October, November, and US crop is mainly exported January up to June, and that was the time frame that COVID was at a very high curve in China, and the ports was locked down for imports, and that was the main reason why it did have so huge effect, downtrend on USA and Mexico export during that time frame. You can also see that South Africa is getting to a stage that we will export more tonnage compared to USA, and I think in the future we will also expand the tonnage compared to Mexico export to China. The percentage of South Africa crop that is being exported there during 2016, about 78% of South Africa crop was exported to China, and from there on it increased. At that stage, 2016-15 season, the USA and Mexico was also very dominant role players, and the more the Asian market and China market get familiar with South Africa crop and see the quality of our crop and the quality of the factories, final product reaching down there, they start contracting more and more tonnage from South Africa. So the past season, we reached a record of 95% South Africa crop that's been exported, but I believe next season it will go further to 95, 96,000 tons. There, if you do a view at the tonnage for the past seasons, you can see that clearly the on and off season, similar to you get in USA and Mexico. And there you can see the effect that El Nino, South Africa El Nino is a dry season, La Nina is a wet season. So the dry season during 2016, 2019 did have a big effect on our crop. And in 2021, even when it's a wet season, we did have a lot of shock split because of huge rain during January, February. The coming season, the forecast is also we're going to have a wet season, but currently it seems that it will be a little bit less rain than the past season. Therefore, our production forecast of 24,000 tons. If you took a step backwards and you look at the history of our production for the past 20 years, and you took a forecast up to 2025, there you see clearly that our crop have doubled about every 6 years, 7 years time period. And I foresee that in the next 6-7 years time, our crop will double again. But if you take a view for longer than that, then we'll cover it again in a later slide. Because our plantings have started slowing down about a few years ago, so the double up in our crop will not be from 7 to 12 years from now. Then the crop production will start flattening down. If you look at the hectares planted, South Africa in total currently the estimates about 42,000 hectares compared to USA 117,000 and Mexico always the same 165,000 hectares. If you take a ratio compared to our production, total production divided by hectares, our production is about 0.47 tons a hectare. South Africa, we've got full irrigation, so there's no semi-irrigated crop or half-irrigated crop. In USA, the production is 0.73 tons a hectare. The main reason for that is the huge amount of natives they have. I think their real production under irrigation will be above 1 ton a hectare. And Mexico is a little bit less than half ton, 0.9 ton a hectare. The main reason for that is the challenge that they've got with irrigation, availability in water, and quality of water. They've got them there. If you look at the hectares planted every year, there you can see from 2000 up to currently, we reach our peak of plantings like 3,000 hectares a year during the season 2017. 2020. From there, the plantings went down. The main reason was the dropping in international prices of pecan, and also further downward pressure was the COVID event that happened. My forecast is the plantings will increase from next year again, but it will not reach the mark of 3,000, 4,000 tons. Therefore, the production will occur for flattening in the next 5 to 10 years time period from South Africa. There you can clearly see the amount of trees that is in bearing crop. 51% of our trees is 7 years and older, and only 33% of our trees is 10 years and older. So that shows clearly that South Africa is still a young country in the pecan industry. But we will get at 80% of trees that is matured and bearing crop in 2026. USA and Mexico is both above 90% of trees that is in production compared to South Africa. The areas that we do our production, there you can see in the chart that the percentage of the different areas in SAPA that the production represent. In the middle area, that is more the higher yield area. The western areas represent 77% of our crop planting, and the eastern area about 23% of the crop planting. If you zoom in more to the area we are situated in Hartswater, in our area and the surrounding areas about 100 kilometers represent about 58% of the plantings. And the other area that we've also got a receiving point in Paraberg, Modderrivier area represent 12%. So our total procurement area, nearby areas, is about 70%, but we procure area from all the different areas in South Africa. If you look at the quality of pecans the past 4 years, you can clearly see at the El Nino event in 2016 and 2019, when the temperatures was higher, there was a bigger percentage of oversize and extra large compared to the La Nina event where the temperatures was lower. If you look at the mediums, that too time frame 2018, 2020, the mediums was higher. So we need a little bit more temperatures to get bigger nuts in our area. the cultivars that has been planted, the main area cultivars you can see in that graph, and the less suitable areas in the other graph. On that graph is all the different cultivars that have been planted in South Africa, and I've shown in the areas surrounding by green, the main cultivars that have been planted. If you look at the price effect, the past 5 years, there you can see the price was at a very good stage at 2017, $5.40. That's the farm gate price. But there was a drop in the price because of COVID effect and all the things that happened with commodities international and shipping price up to a bottom level of $3.62. There was an increase the past season for about 30 cents. And I think there will be another increase of about 30 cents for 2022. Dan Zidane, they have done a long-term view on pecan prices, farm gate price, and his view that the long-term price would be an average of $4.30 per kg, and I think he's correct on that one. The reason for South Africa being so high percentage of our crop being exported to China and so high in demand is our harvest season. We've got a unique marketing opportunity, having all our crop being harvested in August and all our shipments being done in October. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was really an honor for me to share this information with you guys.
Well, Fons, thank you so much. Some really interesting information there. Thanks very much. Our second speaker today is Dr. Chris Smith. Chris was born in Kimberley and raised on a farm in the Northern Cape. That's that central region area that Alphonse was showing you. So that's the sort of region that Chris comes from. He finished with a soil science degree at the University of Free State in Bloemfontein, and focused on plant nutritional aspects for his MSc and his PhD. After university, Chris worked as a researcher for the Agricultural Research Council. And just by way of interest, I heard at the pre-meeting that Chris and Alphonse were actually roommates at university. So that's probably where they started conjuring up all this pecan information. Chris started at Kynoch Yara during 2004 as a team leader and agriculturalist, and was part of the joint venture with the Sidi Parani area in the Northern Cape. Today, Chris is a senior agriculturalist in Kynoch and is living his dream in one of his passions, and that is pecan nutrition. Chris has compiled the chapters in the Pecan Production Manual for the Agricultural Research Council Tropical and Subtropical Plants on tree phenology and nutrition. He has also been asked by the Fertilizer Society of South Africa, that's FERTASA, to rewrite the chapter on pecan nutrition for the new fertilizer handbook. This is in process. Welcome, Chris, and thanks very much for coming.
Thank you very much, Duncan, for the introduction. The presentation today is rather long, ladies and gentlemen, and it's a lot of information to try and put into 30 minutes. So I need to really push hard through this presentation to try and cover everything. As Duncan said, or rather he already started with a statement, but all the information presented today could be found in this manual by the ARC. Also, there's a lot of information published and available on the SAPA website that you can really have a look at. And then also in the chapter that will be available in the next new fertilizer handbook. If we look at the contents, you can see there's really a lot of subjects that we will look at. So I'm not going to go through the contents as such. We rather start with the real thing. As basically linked onto the presentation by Alphonse, it is a fact that the South African producer would like to stay in the forefront of the international market. He will need to strive for size and high kernel fill. In other words, quality. Important to realize that nut size is not necessarily a main function of nutrition alone, but rather to a great extent those of water in terms of quantity and appropriate time. We know that nut filling, quality and number of nuts are strongly linked to nutrition. If we quickly talk about planting density and patterns, we know that historically the typical density planted was 10 by 10 meters. Nowadays producers plant 8 by 6 and 10 by 5 meters, which implicates at least double the amount of trees per hectare. According to my opinion, at this stage, there's not a right or a wrong. However, we know that light interception by the pecan remains critically important. And if insufficient light penetrates the canopy, small branches could die off and a negative impact on yield could take place. So something that before that, the higher densities therefore would require more control over your tree size, hence more hedging. Nowadays, the producers are making use of a plant growth regulator belonging the triazole, and only time will tell whether tree size at higher density could be managed effectively. If we look at row orientation, it will basically be north-south direction. If we look at pruning, we know that trees could become very old and very big. It therefore needs a strong structure to support the weight of the tree and also then a large tree a nut harvest. Therefore, the following two pruning types or approaches are very important. Initially, the young tree are shaped to create the best possible framework. Later on and on a continual basis, selective pruning will be done to maintain this framework. Also, hedging need to take place from a relative early stage to keep the rows, the trees in shape. Very important, ideally, we would like to see limb angles on the trees bigger than 60 degrees and not smaller. If we look at these two pictures, this is a typical example of a young tree being shaped in a kind of a candelier framework with a long central leader. This is a very good example of a so-called crow foot, where one can clearly see angle or limb angles smaller than 60%. That is very undesirable because of breakage during strong winds and even especially when associated with heavy crop loads. This is a picture from the side of an orchard showing of how it looks like after hedging took place. Also, another orchard after leaves reached full stage expansion, and this producer hedged the trees to a specific form that he think would optimize sunlight interception. Another picture on the left-hand side, trees being hedged, and on the right-hand side, the younger trees being pruned. If we look quickly at alternate bearing issues, we know that it is associated with pecan trees like many other fruit trees, and we know that it is mainly an issue of energy levels. All aspects of generating more energy and energy levels will impact positively on alternate bearing. And there's a lot of different factors that could play a role, but the big strategy would be to try and generate as much energy and reserves as possible. something about weed control and orchard floor management. We all, as agriculturists, would like to see maximum soil coverage for known reasons like carbon, isolation, microorganisms in the soil, and all those kinds of benefits. At the New Mexico State University, one of the lecturers, Richard Herrema, said, grow it, just mow it. So he's also a supporter of anything that's growing on the orchard floor. However, we see some tendencies among the producers, preferences that will be influenced by the way they harvest. The more they harvest manually and maintain the orchard manually, the more we see soil coverage. And the more they harvest mechanized, we see the opposite. When we look briefly at irrigation systems and scheduling, we see all of the irrigation systems in the orchards, whether it's flood, partial area, or total area. We see drip irrigation between 1 and 4 lines per tree row, with the lines above ground and even subsoil. And then there are even producers who would like to close the emitters between trees. Then we see micro sprayers, 1 or 2 per tree, and we see macro sprayers which will irrigate only the tree rows or even the total surface area. However, something that is very important and that every producer should realize is that the wetting area would impact directly on your fertilizer management, your strategy, and the rates that you can apply. The smaller your wetting area, the more it will limit your whole fertilization amount of fertilizer that you can apply at a time and eventually in total. And the opposite applies, where a bigger area will favors your fertilization. If asked what deficiencies one would look out for, and if I can choose only 3 or name 3, the first one would be nickel, with some pictures on top. The second one would be zinc, with the pictures in the middle, and the bottom one, the third one, would be potassium. You can see the impact on kernel filling, and that is one that I think that is very much overlooked. We know that soil type and geology would influence the presence or the absence of some nutrients in the system. The important part in this presentation is the important keys in pecan nutrition. So I'm going to skip these 2 slides to save some time and start with this one. This is the so-called pecan growth wheel. If one take all the facts and information written in literature and you try to put that, or you put that in a diagram, this is how it looks like. It represents the different phenological growth stages, and you can see it's like a clock. September month, for some reason, I've put it at 12 o'clock. That is not intended really for a specific reason, but we know that the tree will go through a specific development every year, and it will basically on the same time. This diagram is generalized for South African conditions, so in the different areas something could happen earlier or later, but we will see according to this diagram that during October the tree will start to show movement. The buds will starting to show, also leaves will start to show and start expanding. And so it will happen month for month, all the different phenological stages. Literature tells us clearly that during October, when the tree is starting to move, energy from the reserves is needed. It also tells us that 3 weeks after bud break, fresh nutrition is needed. And also when the nuts are going to busy finishing off with nut fill, just before harvest, again, that will happen from energies. energy from the reserves. So the whole strategy with fertilizer would be to start early, October, when the tree's starting to tell you that it is start growing. And then one would space the fertilizer between 5 and 10 times during the season, including your starting fertilizer and ending with your winter fertilizer, so that there could be sufficient energy again when the trees start during October. Sorry, something important on that slide is that in the center you will see that the driver of all these processes, the growth during the season, would be the canopy and photosynthesis. And anything that impacts negatively on those two will impact on everything that happens during that season and eventually harvest. Additionally to the wheels, some two facts that is very important to realize is that the number of male flowers that will show within a specific season will be determined by shoot length grown during the previous 2 years. That's quite amazing. And then the number of female flowers that will open during a specific season will be determined approximately 8 months earlier, according to the amount of stored energy reserves. So I will take the time to read you the last sentence, and that is for these reasons. Annual varying and changing fertilizer strategy by a producer should be avoided, since it could attribute to increasing amplitudes between on and off years, so-called alternating bearing. In terms of roots, we know, according to very good research done in the past, that the pecan trees are very important. It is defined as mycorrhizal roots, which could implicate a poor correlation between soil nutrient levels and pecan yield. There's a number of authors that feels that there's not a good correlation between soil nutrient levels and yield, as well as leaf analysis. We know, according to research, that a healthy and a vigorous root system is very important, and the reason for that is we know that roots provide anchorage, water uptake, nutrient uptake, hormone production, and energy and starch storage. So, one component of pecan production is the maintenance of the tree, which includes energy reserves as well as fresh nutrition added to support yield. And for this reason, I've read the previous sentence totally, so that one should realize that you don't need to fertilize only for crop removal, but you need to fertilize also for maintenance of the trees. For interesting sake, I've put together a table which is presented over 2 slides. On the right-hand side of the table, one can see all the different nutrients, and on the left-hand side, the role in the plant, with special reference to pecan. So one can see that there's a lot of different functions that's happening within a plant, and on the right-hand side, it clearly shows that an element is not isolated doing 1 or 2 or 3 specific functions. In fact, they are all involved in all the varying roles in the plant. Also, if you look at, it's very small, but on the table, resistance to cold and stress, to drought, to heavy metals, to mechanical stress, pests and diseases, salinity, ultraviolet, they all play together in this role for these roles. And if I had to summarize the whole table into just this table, again showing the different phenological growth stages on the left-hand side that you can use as a guidance for dividing your fertilizer applications, you will see on the right-hand side that basically all the elements are needed to support growth, survival, and reproduction. And one can say that the elements interact in a matrix over the whole spectrum of the active growing season. Therefore, we support the fertilizer proposal or guideline as what I will tell you later on. In terms of zinc, it's a very important input for pecan. The tree shows a constant need for zinc. We know that it's not mobile within the plant. From a distance, a tree with serious deficiency will appear rusty. We will see leaf margin curliness, which will be associated either with chlorosis or even necrosis. Leaves could be dwarfed with rosettening. There could be shoot and branch dieback, as well as dieback of the leaf canopy. Well, literature from the US should be interpreted with big caution because of the following reasons. In the eastern parts of the US, the southeastern parts, soils are naturally acidic, while those in the western parts naturally more alkaline. And Herrera told us that in New Mexico, one could expect to see pHs higher than 7. For this reason, or rather, let me start with this. So historically, pecan producers and even academics thought that the only way to support zinc in the tree would be by foliar zinc applications. But it's not true. Today, in Florida, they will tell us where the soil is southeastern and the soils are acidic, they will tell us that zinc sulfate is quite effective in building soil zinc levels. In Arizona, it's southwesterly with alkaline soils, and zinc EDTA shows significant positive results. In Texas, a lot of mixed information was provided, but again, zinc EDTA obtained better results. The Texans also suggested that it would be more effective to apply zinc in bands alongside your drip lines and not to just broadcast it on top of the soil surface. When I take the information provided by the authors show right below, one can draw this diagram, a so-called seesaw, a balance between soil pH and zinc resources, or sources rather. On the left-hand side, when the soil pH is 5.3 and lower, sulfates would be okay, chelates not needed. On the right-hand side, 6.5 pH and higher, sulfates would not be okay, but rather chelates. And even at higher pHs like 8, one could make use of more stable chelates. The middle area between 5.3 and 6.5 is a gray area where sulfates could work, if not then chelates. And factors that could play a role in the gray area is definitely the origin of the soil and the parent material, which is made up the geology, the presence of free carbonates, as well as water quality. It's interesting to know that the pecan is a hydrophilic species, which means that it is a water-loving creature with a high need for nickel, and it cannot survive without nickel. And the reason for that is that nickel is needed in catalyzed reactions, which includes urease, the nitrogen conversion within the plant, as well as a lot of complexing within the plant with protein and peptides. So that makes the pecan quite unique. If we look at soil preference very quickly, we know that in nature, from their natural habitat, pecan is associated with deep soil that is well drained, also with a flavor of preference towards more sandy soil. So the middle part is the important part that every producer or someone who would like to plant a orchard should realize, and this is, however, does not implicate that the producer cannot plant pecan on soils that deviate from the natural preference. But it is important that producers should notice that the more soil deviate from the natural preference, the more difficult it would be to manage, with a possible negative impact on growth and yield. So a lot of soils could be used, but take note of the limitations. This picture, in terms of sodium and salt sensitivity of the pecan, one would not like to see this in a pecan orchard. Interesting to start with is that we generally assume that a soil with the electrical conductivity between 0 and 200 millisiemens per meter, such a soil is defined by many sources as it will not have a negative impact on crop growth. This is, however, not true for pecan. The upper limit for pecan is 190 millisiemens per meter, and this figure is applicable only to the top 30 centimeter layer of the soil. Literature tells us that at the EC of 250 millisiemens per meter, yield limitation or drop in yield could be 10%. At 350, it could be approximately 25%. At 490, 50%. At 500, we can see dieback of branches, and trees could even die at 600. What we don't know is what the cumulative effect will be if deeper soil layers are also brackish or saline. This is a typical picture of scorching on the leaf edges due to high excessive levels of salt within the soil. When we look at leaf nutritional status, it's important to realize that the leaf norm is defined as those nutrient levels at a particular age and position on the plant that correlates the best with yields. So there are different viewpoints. For instance, Cook really, as I've said earlier, believes that there's not a good correlation between what is happening in the soil and what is happening in the leaf. Very interesting. Authors like Mengon and Kirkby differs totally from Cook, but what we know is that nutrient levels in leaves changes with age. For instance, NP and K tend to decrease with age, while those for calcium and boron, for example, will increase. However, the following two aspects are critical important, namely, number A, timing and positioning on the tree. We know for South African conditions, we look at 120 to 150 days after flowering as the appropriate time to collect leaf samples. And mostly this would be mid-January. And on the right-hand side, one can see the diagram which tells us how to collect leaf samples. And in essence, it tells us to collect the middle pair of leaves on the leaflet that could be found in the middle of the new season's growth. So I remember it always as the middle of the middle. Then if number B, the second point, if we look at norms as such, we know that South Africa do not have its own norms, published norms. We are making use of that from the US. One should be careful. Take note that the most western state would be Arizona, the most eastern one will be Florida, and among those two, eastern and western, guidelines for the different states differ from each other. So when working with on an orchard, make sure what the long-term average climate would be for your area, and look also at those from the US and compare apples with apples in such a way. I proposed the norms from New Mexico, Arizona, and Georgia. What is important also to incorporate into your strategy is that Wells and Wood published work showing that the N to K ratio in leaves should be 2:1. If we look quickly at nutritional management, we know that we make use of the leaf samples together with the soil samples in order to compile a strategy. Again, we avoid sudden big changes, and good record keeping is always important. Now, if we look at the fertilizer guidelines specifically, Again, there's a lack of published fertilizer guidelines, so companies in South Africa would apply their own versions of guidelines put together by them, and the one coming up is one that I propose. On the left-hand side, you can see the age of the tree age, 0 to 3, 4 to 7, and older than 7. In the middle, the NPK rates in kilograms per hectare in season, in other words, excluding winter fertilization. And to calculate the amount of fertilizer needed for winter fertilization, one can make use of the factors, N factor for the N application, and so forth. It's important to realize that your fertilizer approach will be influenced by the type of irrigation, whether it's flood or fertigation. So we look at the effective wetting area per tree, the amount of water per emitter, as well as tree spacing, and they all will determine how the specific strategy would be applied. For instance, if a producer fertigates adult trees with only one drip line, because of the risk to the tree and the roots by the high salt index and concentrations of the actual needed fertilizer, it would be impossible to apply to that tree the needed amount of fertilizer. So at the end of the day, it is a risk balance between wetting type, wetting area per tree, and your fertilizer requirement. When we look at fertilization of young trees during orchard establishment, one can really spend a lot of time on this. I'm not going to. When you visit leading pecan producers in the US, it's amazing how much time and effort they spend on soil corrections or remediations before establishment. So we ought to do that before establishing. If not, like in the most instances that we find in South Africa, there are some pointers that one can look at. When we look at foliar applications, we need to realize that there's a complex interactions between the environment, the species, the plant species, phenological growth and development, timeliness of applications, as well as the basic components of spraying operation. We know that the basic components will be made up by the concentration of the solution, water quality, time of the day, humidity, temperatures, wind conditions, size of droplets, and very important, the use of adjuvants. The use of adjuvants is something that's really important, and I can really recommend using that. We also know that a solution with a high concentration or a low concentration could result in very different outcomes. We know that the leaves are covered by hydrophobic cuticle layers, in other words, and waxes. Therefore, one need to follow procedures quite well. If we quickly look at your different elements, NPK is something that could be sprayed basically throughout the whole season. Calcium and magnesium. Calcium and sulfur is more difficult sometimes to accommodate within your spraying program, but magnesium could be very beneficial for the impact that it have or contribution to chlorophyll production and photosynthesis. Zinc is the important one, and we need to make use of the correct type. Good news is that whether it's sulfate, chelate, nitrate, or organic complexes, all are acceptable. We need to spray on the right time. In that paragraph, there's very good pointers when to start and not necessarily why we need to start that early, at 50% leaf expansion already, and after the indicated times. Also, we need to know that during new flushes, we should spray zinc. I suggest that one look at the flushes, whether it's showing zinc deficiency or not, and then make a decision. In terms of the right place, it's interesting to know that the lower side of the pecan leaves absorb spray and elements better than the upper side. And for that reason, we need to spray the trees from the soil upwards. And that is the reason why aerial sprays are less effective. Then there's some information in terms of the dosage, and then some information given by the Texans. If we look at boron and copper, both of these elements could be included with the early sprays that together with zinc, and the reason for that is because of their valuable contribution to pollen, the quality and the integrity of pollen, and therefore also on the process of pollination. Nickel is very important to do with throughout the season. For all of the elements, one needs to look at leaf analysis and also make use of leaf analysis to adapt the program. And therefore, we need also history, previous years. But something that we need to mention is that nickel is a toxic heavy metal, and strict safety precautions should therefore always be taken and followed. Very important. I'm not going to explain anything about silicon and molybdenum, although molybdenum for South African conditions is something that one really could spend a couple of minutes talking about. Duncan, thank you very much. This is my presentation.
Chris, thank you very much. That was very, very well presented, and there's a lot of information. And just for all of you out there, this presentation will be, and this webinar, so Alphonse and Chris's and Felipe's coming up, will be made available, which you can then refer to at a later time. So Chris, there was a lot of information, but it was most interesting. Thank you. Our final speaker today is Felipe Gazira. Felipe is an agronomist who graduated at the Bahia State University in Brazil, specializing in tropical irrigated fruticulture. Felipe has 25 years of experience working in plant nutrition and fertigation. His professional activities have been honed in more than 40 countries. His family are also mango and table grape farmers in Brazil, so he has hands-on experience there. Felipe has worked for SQM now for 10 years, 7 years based in Brazil, and currently for the last 3 years, he is the SQM Global Marketing Development Manager based in Belgium. So a warm welcome to you, Felipe, too. Please proceed. Thank you.
Thanks, Duncan. Thanks for having me. And also I'd like to thanks to you and Etienne and all the South African SQM team for the opportunity in share this webinar with Alphonse and Dr. Chris. It's really a pleasure to me. Well, as you can see, the topic we will shortly discuss today, and that's the benefits of chloride-free and nitrate nutrition in horticultural crops. And then before we start with the technical comments, I just would like to introduce you and let you know why in SQM agronomic department, we really study a lot the effects of chloride-free and nitrate nutrition in crops. As company in SQM, we are the producers of the three main potassium sources: potassium nitrate, sulfate, and chloride. So we always study, okay, what is the real difference between these potassium sources? And then if you want to understand from the nutritional management point of view, what is the difference between these sources, we need to look at chemically what these sources are supplying to the soil or to the soil solution from where the plants will uptake water and nutrients. And then if you look chemically to which elements each one of these sources are supplying to the plants, then we will see that obviously the common element between them are the potassium, so all of them are supplying potassium. And then the difference between these sources for the balance in the nutrient solution will be the counter ion. That will be the ion that will come together with potassium, because in each source of this, together with potassium, we are supplying other ions that come together with potassium. In case of potassium nitrate, it's nitrogen. In case of potassium sulfate, sulfur. And in case of potassium chloride, chloride, as you can see in a huge amount. And also that factor that affect the balance in the soil, it's regarding the nitrogen form, because normally when we apply, for example, potassium nitrate, we are applying nitrogen in nitrate form, as the name says, but it's quite common together with potassium sulfate or potassium chloride. It's being used urea or ammonium sulfate as nitrogen source. And then mainly this one, ammonium sulfate already nitrogen in ammoniacal form, or if you use urea, then it will be NH2, and amidic nitrogen, but then you'll be converted to ammoniacal nitrogen as well. So let's just put all the same basket to make it simple. Then we have a difference when we are using the different sources as well on the nitrogen source, or in the form on the nitrogen sources that we are applying. And then this also change a little bit the balance. So that's more or less the reason why in our agronomic department, normally we study the effects of chloride-free and nitrogen nutritional based programs. And then saying that, to understand from where comes more or less the cern of our topics and researches, let's go to the main topic of this presentation, that is really talk about the benefits of chloride-free nutrition and nitrates. When we talk or talk about chloride-free nutrition, now we need to consider, okay, what is the impact of the chloride or the amount of chloride that we will apply together with our fertilizer or via the fertilizers we will use. And the chloride has impacts in the water, in this case, considering the water used for irrigation, also have impact in soil and also have impact in plants. And then if you go to a quick look in each one of them, considering the effect of the chloride in irrigation water, the main impact is that the chloride immediately will increase the water EC, the electrical conductivity. As exactly Dr. Chris just showed it to all of you. And the impact of this, it's different according to the crops. Each crop has his own tolerance to a certain EC till the moment that you start to have some kind of losses, yield losses or quality losses. Now, here you have a reference for many crops. It's highlighted here in red. You can see the reference for walnut. We don't have the reference specifically for pecan, but we have it for walnut. So let's say it's still a nut. From where you can see that on the blue column, that is the EC from the water, irrigation water. And in the orange column, that is the EC from the soil solutions, let's say the final solution from where the roots will uptake water and nutrients. And then you have the reference 2.4 or 1.6 EC from water. This is in millisiemens per centimeters. So if you multiply by 100, then you'll be in millisiemens per meter, the same unit as Dr. Chris just used it. So if you remember, he mentioned that for pecan, the maximum will be something around 250, if I remember well, that it's in line with this 240 or 2.4 as shown here. So these are the levels. From above these levels, we start to have losses, in this case for walnut, also the reference for other crops. But this means if a water comes already with a higher EC in the water, we have less space to add more fertilizers in this water via fertigation. So that is the impact, the negative impact of the chloride in irrigation water. Increase the initial EC of the water and then diminish the gap that we have in this water to add the other elements, the other nutrients, in order to reach the maximum EC and don't have losses due to the high EC. Other impact from the chloride that we need to consider is the impact in soil, the chloride in soil. The chloride will increase the soil salinity, which will affect root development, water and nutrient uptake. We know that as higher is the EC outside the roots, or they say in the environment, in the soil, in the environment of the roots, also higher is, let's say, the strong force that the plant needed to do to take or uptake the water from the soil. So this is, let's say, spend an extra energy to the plant to uptake same amount of water, or depending on the level of the EC, even the plant will uptake less water. So we need to consider this effect in soil. and also the toxicity of the chloride defect in the plants. Now, when absorbed chloride, it's used for the most vegetables in levels as a micronutrient, not as a macronutrient, unless for some specific crops. But for the general commercial crops we have, chloride is required in levels as a micronutrient, not as a macronutrient. But when we supply and plants absorb chloride in macronutrient amounts, then we have toxicity in plants. The common symptoms normally are necrosis on the margins of the leaves, as also Dr. Chris just showed to you. Here you have some examples in walnuts or in almonds from leaves affected by excess of chloride. And despite this one, we need to take into consideration that when you have leaves with these symptoms, like this means that are leaves that are producing less photosynthesis. So the plants are producing less photosynthesis, so less carbohydrates, probably less dry matter, probably less production. So this is the chain effect in these cases. And also in not only for pecan, walnuts, or nuts, the symptom is more or less the same for all other crops. Here you have also some reference from chloride toxicity in plants in citrus, mango, grapes, and more or less the effect is the same in all crops. So regarding the benefits of the nitrate nutrition, we need to consider that nitrogen is the only element that can be absorbed by the plants in two different forms, let's say. It can be absorbed as nitrate or as ammonium. And chemically speaking, we have one difference between these both ions, because one has a negative charge and another one has a positive charge. But both are nitrogen, but one negative and one positive. And in chemistry, we call this an element with negative charges an anion and a positive charge as a cation. So one is an anion, another is a cation. And what this means for the balance for our nutritional management. When you look to the elements, the macronutrients, that's talking about the macronutrients that are absorbed by the plants in higher amounts, then you have the split between the cations. These are all the nutrients or the ions that has positive charges, and the anions, all the nutrients or elements that has the negative charges. And when you look at this, we will see that potassium, calcium, magnesium, together with ammonium, all these are cations. And normally, potassium and nitrogen are the elements required in the highest amounts, and then following by calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. So if you look to this, we will see that the plant needs to absorb the elements in balance in order to maintain the electrical balance in the plant. Otherwise, when we touch the plant, we will have a shock, but we don't have it because in the nature, the plants absorb cations and anions in balance. In order to keep or facilitate the plant to do that, if you apply all our nitrogen as ammonium, then potassium, calcium, and magnesium, we will have a much higher amount of positive charges in the soil than negative charges. So in this case, for example, nitrate help us, especially together with sulfur and phosphorus, in keep the balance between the positive and the negative charges, or the electrical balance in soil. So the first benefit of the nitrate nutrition is that we have more negative charges in order to help the plant in absorb cations and anions in balance from the soil solution. And the practical effect of this, we can see in this animation, is that if the plant is uptaking all the nitrogen in ammoniacal form with positive charge cation, together with ammonium, plant will not uptake the other cations, will not uptake calcium, magnesium, or potassium, and all the other elements with positive charge, because together with one ammonium positive need to absorb one element with negative charge. And it's the opposite when you have nitrate nitrogen present in soil solution. Together with the nitrate nitrogen, that's an anion negative charge, plant can uptake the other cations or ions with positive charge. So means together with nitrate, plant will uptake potassium, calcium, and magnesium. And this is really the main one of the main effects or the main benefits in to have the nitrogen nutrition. It's increasing the uptake of cations by the plant from soil solution. A second effect, as a nitrate has a negative charge, is an ion, and chloride, it's also an anion. And if you have a plant growing in saline conditions and that salinity is caused by chloride, that's an extra advantage in increase the amount of nitrogen in your soil solution. Because if plant is uptake nitrogen in nitrate form, plant cannot uptake chloride because both are anions. And that is the opposite with ammonium. If plant uptake in saline conditions and the salinity caused by chloride, if plant uptake ammonium with positive charge, plant will be possible to the plant uptake also chloride with a negative charge in the plant. So then under saline conditions caused by chloride, that's an extra reason or an extra benefit in use a higher amount of nitrogen instead of ammoniacal nitrogen. And in order to not talk only about the effects of the chloride and the benefits of nitrate, we can also show some research conducted in areas that are growing, plants growing under saline condition, but caused by sodium and not with chloride. And this is a research that was conducted in the United States with muskmelon. But the concept of plant nutrition can be used for any other crop because we're talking about the balance in the nutrient solution. What was done here was keep the same nutrient solution and was added 100 millimoles of sodium chloride in order to simulate strong saline conditions. And then in both nutrient solutions, same level of nitrogen was kept, but one in nitrate form, that's the dark green, and one in ammoniacal form, that's the light green. And then you can see that with the same amount of sodium chloride, nitrogen, and all the other elements, same nutrient solution, the only difference was the nitrogen form between nitrate and ammonium. It's possible to see that the sodium content, it was much higher when we have ammonium in comparison with nitrate in the leaves, in the stems and petioles, or in the roots. So the sodium content in plant tissue, it was much higher with ammonium in comparison with nitrate. And the explanation to this one comes when you look at also to the potassium content in the same plant, in plant tissue. We also noted that the potassium content in plant tissue, it was much higher when nitrogen was present in comparison with ammonium. And then the explanation of this, it was that the ammonium, because it's also a cation, it was limiting the uptake of potassium by the plant. And then this decreased the potassium-sodium rate or selectivity in the roots, and then resulted in a great uptake of sodium. So if ammonium was, let's say, limiting the absorption of potassium, then plant was also taking more sodium to compensate a little bit the lack of potassium. So then we can clearly see with this that with nitrate we have higher amounts of potassium and lower amounts of sodium, and with ammonium we have higher amounts of sodium and lower amounts of potassium. So then we also have the benefits not only in saline conditions due to chloride, but also we could have some benefits when the salinity is caused by sodium, or even if it's caused by both sodium and chloride. So thank you for your attention. This was my quite short presentation just to give you some highlights about the benefits of a chloride-free and a nitrate-based nutrition. Thanks, Duncan.
Felipe, thank you very much. Yeah, most interesting. Thank you. We have one or two questions, and I think the first question asked by Peter, and I think it's for you, Alphonse, is by 2030, will there be any preferential color for the nuts in the pecans from a marketing point of view?
Vishal, thank you for the question. Yes, on the marketing, especially on Asia and China, where they use it in shop, there's an advantage to have the sharp-pointed nuts like Wachita, Pawnee, Nauvoo, Western Sly. they prefer that nuts because it went to a different kind of customer. The round nuts like Choctaw or Navajo, Choctaw and Shoshone, that went in to a different online market. The online market have shrink a bit after the COVID time period. That's why, but it changes. 5-6 years ago, they preferred more the rounder nut, but I think in long term, the sharp nut will be a lower risk cultivar to plant.
Okay, so that's the shape of the nut. So you export that as a complete nut. Now, the color of the inside is that important?
It's all similar. There's no difference in the color of the different cultivars of the meat yield.
The next question, I think, is also from Peter. I think is for Chris. Chris, Peter asks about tree height versus spacing. In other words, what is the ideal, I would imagine, for light interception in an orchard? Is there a ratio to maintain a height according to your row width? Did you get?
Hey, Duncan. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that there's a ratio, but I don't know it from my head. So I really need to go and look that up. I don't know it from my head.
Okay, well then you can perhaps get back to Peter on that one.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions, and the one is, I have a deciduous fruit background, and I think, if you look at a pecan, it's also a deciduous tree. It's just a much larger animal, and I think large in the deciduous fruit tree industry, the density and plant spacing was primarily determined by genetics and then by new rootstocks or dwarfing rootstocks and rootstock scion or cultivar combinations. And so genetics was sort of a primary role in plant density, with pruning then as a secondary role to manage that plant within the density that you've planted it. So in the pecan industry, is there any light regarding dwarfing rootstocks, perhaps?
Duncan, as far as I know, no. I'm not aware of any dwarfing rootstocks. So at this stage, what is available to the producer is growth hormones to limit growth, and also hedging, as you've said, a secondary way of trying to manipulate the size of the tree. But I'm not that informed about where the dwarfing rootstock is down the line, but I know that when we get there, it will definitely impact hugely on the whole industry. And one can just wonder, what does it mean that established orchards will be removed, or how will that impact the whole industry as such?
I think the other interesting pruning technique in the deciduous fruit industry is especially for light distribution, is summer pruning. Sort of November, December, one would remove a branch, but I know in pecans the branches are so big that when it comes down, it will probably destroy everything on the way down. But summer pruning is dwarfing, whereas winter hedgerowing, it can stimulate growth and shading at the cut point. So judicial, let's say, branch selection and removal in summer is a technique used in the fruit industry. Is there any work on that in the pecan industry?
Duncan, I'm aware that some farmers do look at summer pruning, but I don't think it's really a big standard process. And then I know that Americans make use of green, shaking the tree, shaking off some small nuts to decrease the size of the load. But I haven't seen that really being done in South Africa. There could be some producers, working on that, doing that. But I haven't seen anyone doing the green shake of nuts. And as I've said, I know in terms of your younger trees, I've seen quite a number of producers breaking off tips. But whether it's done on the big orchards, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm thinking, more for light distribution, so a corrective one rather than young tree manipulation. Anyway, it's something that people can perhaps consider. You also mentioned reserves and how important it is in pecans. Now, again, coming back from my deciduous background, post-harvest fertilizer had to be done at least 2 weeks after shoot growth has stopped, because there's no point doing a post-harvest fertilizer if that fertilizer goes into pushing growth further, because then it's going into growth and not into reserves. Is there that sort of recommendation in the pecan tree?
Duncan, what I've seen in literature is that there are indications that there is root movement during dormancy. And what is sometimes really determined, the program of the farmer is he will adapt that to practicality. Sometimes they don't want to do the winter fertilization while they are harvesting or before. They first would like to end their harvesting, finish everything, and then get to fertilization. I believe it's important that it should be done rather earlier than too late. But even if it's too late, I think it's better than not doing the winter fertilization.
Yeah. Well, obviously the leaves still have to be on the tree, but not actively growing, because you still need the leaves for the uptake, I would imagine, to generate the uptake. Thanks, Chris, for that. I see there are some comments by Dr. Elmi Lotz from Horticulture, saying that Argentina are playing around with rootstocks, but keeping it close to their chests. And there were some comments also on spacing. But I don't see any more formal questions. I'd like to just thank all you participants especially, and for all those who've signed into today's webinar. Just a reminder that you will get this link in the next couple of days, so you can send it on to people who will be interested in the topic, or you can go through it again, because there was a lot of information in Chris's talk. But thanks again, and have a good afternoon or good day or good evening, depending where you are. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.